I still remember the way my son smiled as we turned onto the long gravel driveway leading to my Uncle Harris family ranch. Bright summer flowers lined both sides of the road, and colorful balloons swayed gently from the white wooden fence. Every year our family held a huge reunion there, and for most people it was just another barbecue. For my 9-year-old son, Ethan, it was something he had been counting down to for months because he could finally spend time with the one person who always made him feel completely accepted, my grandmother, Margaret. As I watched him hug the small blue dinosaur he carried everywhere, I had no idea that within minutes someone would try to convince him he did not belong with his own family. Ethan had autism, but if you asked him about himself, that would never be the first thing he mentioned. He would tell you that he loved trains, knew every dinosaur that ever lived, and dreamed of becoming a wildlife photographer one day. He noticed tiny details that most people ignored, remembered conversations from years earlier, and had the kindest heart of anyone I had ever known. Loud sounds and crowded places sometimes overwhelmed him, but when people showed him patience, he flourished. Unfortunately, not everyone in my family understood that, no matter how many times I tried to explain it. As we parked, Ethan looked at me with hopeful eyes. He asked if Grandma Margaret would still remember the birdhouse they had painted together the previous summer. I laughed softly and told him she probably remembered every single brushstroke because she loved him more than words could ever explain. His face lit up with excitement, and for a brief moment I believed the day would be everything he had imagined. The backyard was already full of relatives. Children were running through sprinklers while adults gathered around picnic tables covered with homemade food. Country music floated through hidden speakers, and the smell of fresh burgers filled the warm afternoon air. It looked like the perfect family gathering. Yet the second Ethan and I stepped out of the car, I noticed several relatives whispering while glancing in our direction. Something about their expressions made my stomach tighten before a single word had been spoken. Just as we reached the front porch, my cousin Rebecca stepped directly into our path. She folded her arms and forced a smile that never reached her eyes. I greeted her, expecting a hug, but she did not move. Instead, she blocked the doorway as though we were strangers trying to enter a private event. The cheerful sounds behind her suddenly felt very far away. Rebecca cleared her throat before speaking. She said she was sorry, but Ethan could not come inside with everyone else. At first I honestly believed she was joking. I laughed awkwardly and asked what she meant, but her face remained completely serious. She explained that several family members had agreed it would be better if Ethan stayed in the guest cabin behind the house where things would be quieter for him. She spoke as though she was doing us a favor instead of excluding my child from his own family reunion. I stared at her in disbelief. I asked who had made such a decision, and she casually mentioned a planning group that had organized the event. According to her, they wanted to avoid another uncomfortable situation like the previous Thanksgiving. I immediately knew what she meant. During that dinner, someone had set off loud party poppers without warning. Ethan became frightened, covered his ears, and cried until I took him outside. That single moment had somehow become the story certain relatives repeated whenever they wanted to describe him. Rebecca quietly admitted that some parents worried their children might feel uncomfortable around Ethan. Hearing those words felt like someone had punched me in the chest. My son had never hurt anyone, he had never been cruel or aggressive. The only thing he had ever done was react honestly to a world that often felt too loud and confusing. Yet somehow he had become the problem instead of the people who refused to understand him. Before I could answer, Ethan gently pulled on my hand. His voice was barely louder than a whisper as he asked if everyone was angry with him. Looking into his eyes at that moment nearly broke me. He had spent weeks drawing pictures to give his cousins and making a homemade birthday card for Grandma Margaret, even though her birthday was still months away. Now he believed he had done something wrong simply because adults had chosen comfort over compassion. Rebecca reached into her pocket and handed me a plastic guest bracelet. She explained that only registered guests were allowed inside the main house and the event organizers had prepared only one bracelet for me. I looked down at the small band resting in my hand before slowly looking back at my son. They had planned every detail. They had remembered to welcome me but had intentionally left my child off the guest list. In that instant I realized this was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate decision that someone believed was perfectly acceptable. Without saying another word, I snapped the bracelet in half and let the pieces fall onto the porch. I wrapped my arm around Ethan and quietly told him we were leaving because no celebration was worth making him feel unwanted. We had only taken a few steps back toward the car when a calm but unmistakably strong voice echoed across the yard, stopping every conversation around us. It was my grandmother Margaret, and the determined look on her face told me she had already sensed that something was terribly wrong. Grandma Margaret was 93 years old, but age had never taken away the quiet strength that made everyone respect her. She walked slowly with the help of a polished wooden cane, yet every step carried confidence. Conversations stopped the moment relatives noticed her approaching. She looked from my tearful face to Ethan, who was holding my hand so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Then she turned toward Rebecca and calmly asked why we were walking back to the car only minutes after arriving. Rebecca forced an uneasy smile and claimed there had simply been a misunderstanding. Before I could speak, Grandma looked directly into my eyes and said she wanted the truth. She had always known when something was wrong, and I realized there was no point protecting anyone from the consequences of their own choices. Taking a deep breath, I explained that several family members had decided Ethan should spend the reunion in the guest cabin because they believed he made people uncomfortable. Saying those words out loud made them sound even crueler than they had moments earlier. The warmth disappeared from Grandma Margaret's face. She slowly turned toward Rebecca and asked whether that was really true. Rebecca nervously admitted that several relatives had agreed it would be easier for everyone if Ethan stayed away from the crowd. She even insisted they believed they were helping him by giving him a quieter place to spend the afternoon. Grandma listened without interrupting, but I could see disappointment growing in her eyes with every sentence. She raised her voice just enough for everyone in the yard to hear. She asked every person who had supported the decision to step forward. At first nobody moved. People stared at the ground, pretending to be busy with their plates of food or talking quietly among themselves. Then my uncle slowly lifted his hand. A few seconds later another aunt admitted she had agreed with the plan. Within moments nearly a dozen relatives silently revealed they had been part of the decision. Watching them confess without saying a word was one of the saddest moments I had ever experienced. Grandma nodded slowly before removing the name badge hanging around her neck. It identified her as the host of the reunion because the gathering had always been held in honor of her birthday. She handed the badge to her caretaker and calmly announced that if Ethan was not welcome, neither was she. A wave of shocked whispers spread through the yard. Several relatives rushed toward her, begging her not to leave because everyone had come to celebrate with her. She looked around at the faces surrounding her and spoke with a sadness that carried more weight than anger ever could. She reminded everyone that a family gathering meant nothing if even one child was made to feel unwanted. Then she shared a story very few of us had ever heard. When she was a little girl, her younger brother had a medical condition that frightened people who did not understand it. Neighbors often told her parents to leave him at home because his condition made others uncomfortable. For years he believed something was wrong with him, and Grandma had never forgiven the adults who allowed him to grow up feeling ashamed. She placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder and said she had promised herself that no child in her family would ever carry that same pain. Looking directly at the relatives who had voted against him, she quietly said they had broken that promise. No one had an answer. The silence hanging over the backyard felt heavier than any argument could have. Then Grandma reached into her purse and removed a sealed envelope. She explained that every year she set aside money to help younger family members with college tuition, medical bills, or buying their first home. Everyone knew how generous she had always been. Instead of opening the envelope, she slipped it back into her purse and announced that the money would be donated to a local organization supporting children with autism and their families. Several relatives looked stunned, while others lowered their heads in embarrassment. My uncle tried to defend the family by saying nobody had meant to hurt Ethan. Grandma calmly replied that good intentions meant very little when someone still chose exclusion over kindness. Those words settled over the crowd like a lesson no one could ignore. For the first time all afternoon, people seemed willing to admit that what they had done was not simply a mistake but an act of discrimination. Just then Ethan looked up at Grandma and softly said he did not want anyone to be punished because of him. She smiled warmly, bent down as much as she comfortably could, and gently cupped his face. She told him he had absolutely nothing to apologize for and that the world needed more people who stayed true to themselves instead of pretending to fit someone else's expectations. I watched my son slowly smile through his tears, and I realized those few words would probably stay with him for the rest of his life. One by one, family members began walking toward us. My cousin Ryan apologized first, admitting he should have spoken up instead of staying silent. His teenage daughter hugged Ethan and thanked him for showing her that everyone experiences the world differently. Another aunt confessed she had been afraid of causing conflict, while an uncle admitted he had simply followed the crowd without thinking about how deeply it would hurt a little boy. Their apologies could not erase what had happened, but they were a meaningful first step. Rebecca remained standing by herself until almost everyone else had spoken. Finally, she walked over with tears in her eyes and admitted she had judged Ethan without ever trying to understand him. Ethan quietly reached into his backpack and handed her his favorite toy dinosaur. He explained that whenever he felt sad, holding it made him feel safe, and maybe it would remind her to be kinder when someone seemed different. Rebecca burst into tears before hugging him gently and thanking him for showing more grace than many adults ever could. The reunion changed completely after that. Instead of expecting Ethan to adapt to everyone else, the family adapted to him. My younger cousins created a peaceful corner beneath a large maple tree where children could read books, build birdhouses, and collect colorful rocks together. Several kids became fascinated by Ethan's knowledge of dinosaurs, and before long he was laughing as he taught them facts they had never heard before. The same relatives who had once worried he would ruin the day now smiled as they watched him make new friends. As the sun began to set, Grandma gathered everyone together for one final family photograph. Before the camera flashed, she looked around and quietly announced there was only one rule: no one would ever again stand outside the circle because every member of the family deserved the same love and respect. She placed Ethan in the very center beside her, wrapped one arm around him and the other around me, and smiled proudly. That photograph still hangs in my living room today. Whenever I look at it, I do not remember the painful beginning of that reunion. I remember the moment my son learned that one courageous person can change the hearts of an entire family. Grandma Margaret passed away the following year, but her greatest gift was never the money she shared or the reunions she hosted. It was the lesson she left behind. Real family never asks someone to change who they are in order to belong. Real family opens the door, makes room at the table, and reminds every child that they have always been enough.